Hello, welcome to Hot Issues, and today we are looking at relations between Ghana and Britain, and we'll be looking at the Commonwealth, we'll be looking at the world, we'll be looking at issues of terrorism, we'll be looking at the general global economic situation. And we are indeed very, very, very privileged to have with us in the studio His Excellency the British High Commissioner, Jean Benjamin. So you're welcome to the studio.
Thank you very much for inviting me.
Yeah. Britain has just fallen out of the World Cup. How does it feel? What was responsible for the early fall of Britain?
Yeah, well, actually, England, because in the world, in football, we always play as a separate countries within the within the United Kingdom. I still haven't quite recovered from it because I don't think anyone in England expected the team to do very well this time. The expectations weren't very high. But although they lost the first game against Italy, they played okay, I thought, and so we still had some hopes that they could maybe beat Uruguay and Costa Rica. But no, that man Luis Suarez, who I know isn't all that popular in Ghana either, for obvious reasons, he knocked us out effectively. So disappointed, not massively surprised, and for someone like me who's sat through 10 World Cups with one disappointment after the other over the last 40 years and more, it's just the latest in a long line of World Cup disappointments.
Well, why was expectation so low?
Well, I think because the team is the one after the generation of Beckham and Scholes and all these players, so they're a very young team, so there's hope for the future because several of the players were late teenagers or early 20s. And England never seemed to perform well. It's a long season in England, so you get to June, most of the players have already played between 40 and 50 games. That sounds like an excuse, but I think there's a fatigue factor as well. But also, it's very difficult for young English players to break through in England because our league, the Premier League, which I humbly think is the best in the world, has players, the best players from all over the world. So it's very, very difficult now for young, homegrown players to break through. So there's some of the reasons, but at the end of the day, you can talk endlessly, but the performance on the pitch is the only thing that counts, and it wasn't very impressive.
How true is the claim that you invented the game?
Well, I think there are other people who claim that, but we like to think we invented it. Through one form or another, there were precursors to football from hundreds of years ago, and what I certainly know is that it was British people, sailors often, who brought football to other parts of the world, such as South America, where I've just been living. So I think we like to claim that, and we like to claim that Wembley Stadium is the home of football as well.
Interestingly, Ghana also lost out. Did you watch the Ghana match?
Yeah, of course. I was rooting for three teams: England and Ghana and Chile, which is where my wife is from. So all three of my teams have now gone. Ghana got a bit further than England did. At least they still had something to play for in the last game. But I think this is a World Cup for both countries to forget pretty quickly.
Besides the fact that England and Ghana did badly in the World Cup, what other things do we share? Apart from sharing defeats in football, what other things do we share?
Apart from a dislike of Luis Suarez, which I think is an important modern new bond. Well, we share an awful lot. We share an incredible history. I appreciate that the colonial history is not entirely a happy one, of course, for Ghana. We understand that, but it is something that binds us together. But much more important than the history is the modern partnership that we have across a very wide spectrum of activities, both in the governmental sphere where I work and also in the non-governmental sphere. And there I'm thinking particularly of a huge Ghanaian diaspora in the UK. I count several personal friends amongst them. These are British citizens of Ghanaian descent, anywhere from the first to the fourth generation now, and they number into the hundreds of thousands of people and they bring with them all sorts of links, interpersonal links and business links, cultural links and so on. And I think that we started talking about football as one example. There are all sorts of cultural themes and the English language and other things that tie us together. And I certainly, just in my first month here in Ghana, have felt a tremendous amount of goodwill. I've had an incredibly warm welcome, for which I'm very grateful, and my job in the governmental sector is to promote those links and take them to a further stage, a further level across the board of politics, defence, culture, economics, trade, investment, and of course we have an important programme of economic assistance here as an important, arguably the most important development partner for Ghana.
What's the quantum of economic assistance? What are you doing?
Well, we have a part of the British government called the Department for International Development, DFID, they're known by. We have a programme of assistance which is nearly £100 million a year that works with the Ghanaian government in several areas, in health, in education, supporting gender issues such as keeping girls in school. It has an important contribution to make, we hope, in the north of the country where the poverty figures are greater. And we support, for example, the LEAP programme, a social support programme from the Ghanaian government. It's also important to remember that the European Union, which is a major donor in itself here, is something we belong to, so Britain contributes about 15-16% of the EU funding as well. And of course we look to work closely with whichever government is in power here in Ghana to look at their own priorities, and our aim is to try and help Ghana to consolidate its status as a lower middle income country, providing ever better prosperity for its people. That's what we're here for, is to try and help on that, in that process.
You did mention investments. What's the nature of investments, in what fields and so on?
Well, there's a huge stock of UK foreign direct investment, as it's called, in Ghana, over £3 billion pounds worth, and that's investments in factories, in production, through different companies that have set up here, and we also hope that British investment can help Ghana add some value to its mainly raw materials exports at the moment. There's one great example, which is the Blue Skies company, which is a British founded company which rather than just exporting Chilean fruits from here from Ghana, actually what it does is it turns those fruits into juice and other products here in Ghana for export every day via British Airways, which is another important British presence here, to the UK market. So we hope that British investment in Ghana makes a big contribution to the economy, creating employment, creating added value to Ghanaian commodities and products.
How lasting would these investments be, given your record elsewhere? Well, what I mean is that is there going to be a time when you're going to pull back these investments? Yeah,
Kwesi, if you don't mind me saying so, I think that comment's a little unfair, and it's important to remember that real investment comes from the private sector. It's not a government activity. What we can do as a government is promote it. We can help, and we do, explain to potential British investors why Ghana is a market that they should look at. But at the end of the day, investment comes from private sector companies, and private sector companies are not charities. They go, obviously, where they can also make a profit, they can do business. So the nature of the market and the economy, whether in Ghana or anywhere else in the world, is one of the determining factors for investment. It's not simply a question of our government or any other government ordering companies to make investments. Certainly in our economy, in our society, it doesn't work like that.
But sometimes political decisions affect these investments, don't they?
They can do, but our policy under the current British government is to promote foreign investment in both directions all over the world, and also to promote the rules internationally and domestically, which allow and guarantee for such investment within very clear, the rule of law, very clear guidelines and so on. So our policy is a very open one towards investment in both directions, and we are the recipients in the UK also of many, many billions of pounds of very important investments in our infrastructure, buildings and so on, and that's something we also encourage in the other direction.
One of the clearly controversial areas in Ghana-UK relations has been the threat by Prime Minister David Cameron that if we did not facilitate, the rights of homosexuals and so on, it could affect our relations with Britain.
Well, I think that's a misrepresentation of what he said, I'm afraid to say. I think that our economic assistance is not tied to such conditions. However, the human rights situation in different countries is something that's taken into account. But he certainly didn't say that. I think he was referring to a situation in completely different countries where there has been much more active oppression and prosecution of people for their sexual orientation, and it was a response to that. It wasn't a condition, and you can see that our programme of cooperation as a major development partner in Ghana has continued just as it was and will into the future. And so I think the way that was portrayed here was an enormous exaggeration of what was said.
I hope so. Now, you also spoke about cooperation in the military. What is the nature of the cooperation?
Well, on the military side, we have an excellent relationship with the Ghanaian military, primarily the army, of course. We cooperate in a number of areas. First of all, we hugely appreciate the massive contribution that Ghana has always made to UN peacekeeping operations around the world, not just in its own region, not just in the continent of Africa, such as currently in Mali or South Sudan, but around the world in countries very distant and often very unfamiliar to people in Ghana. But I think that's a wonderful contribution that Ghana makes as a global citizen to peace in the world. So we cooperate on that. We cooperate through the Kofi Annan International Peacekeeping Training Centre here. We cooperate with visits from the UK Navy, for example. There have been a couple of those in the last year, and numerous Ghanaian officers go to the UK for military training. So there's a very wide set and fruitful set of interactions there between the two militaries. And obviously, because of our historic relationship and past, there are certain ways in which the Ghanaian military was set up at the time of independence, which were modelled on certain practices in UK military history. So there's a great familiarity between how the two militaries operate, and for us it's extremely important area. But again, Ghana's contribution way outside its borders is immense, and every senior Ghanaian officer I've met so far has got years and years and years of experience in different UN peacekeeping operations around the world in very different environments. So that really makes them very professional and very experienced military officers.
What are you offering in the fight against Boko Haram? I mean, specifically.
Well, we've cooperated with Ghana with military assets, Air Force assets, which are conducting surveillance over the area with the permission of the Nigerian government, of course, but concentrating in the area where it is thought that those missing schoolgirls are being held, and that's the current example. But we've cooperated, for example, by helping to transport Ghanaian troops to Mali previously when that situation arose. So we're very flexible, and of course we're guided by the Ghanaian government and Ghanaian military's own priorities to see how we can cooperate there. But our essential kind of philosophy is really very similar in terms of trying to deal with those threats and protect open societies and democracy and the rule of law.
Britons used to say that it ruled the waves.
Well, no one in my generation has said that. I can promise you.
Yeah. And
the era when that was said is one that is a very distant but important historical one of ours. But that's the sort of phrase I've heard far more often outside the UK than inside the UK.
But how come that this generation of British no longer see, themselves as that powerful, great, especially when it comes to ruling the waves?
Well, I think because you've got to differentiate between two things. I mean, the ruling the waves cliche, I would say, refers back to the time of empire, the time of colonies and so on. We see ourselves as a 21st century, modern, diverse, multicultural, successful country, but not for that reason somehow a much less important one, because we're still the sixth biggest economy in the world. We're the second biggest foreign investors in the world. We are a member of the UN Security Council, a permanent member there. We're a member of the European Union. We're a member of NATO. We're a nuclear power. We would certainly reject any characterization of us not being important, but we similarly find very anachronistic now these references back to a much earlier age of empire and colonialism.
Interestingly, Britain is part of NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Alliance. To what extent is Britain, militarily, in terms of its policy makeup and its practical actions on the ground, influenced, for example, by the United States of America?
Well, within NATO, obviously the US is the biggest contributor because it's the biggest military power in the world by a very, very long way. But after that, Britain and France are the ones that have the largest militaries and contribute most to NATO operations traditionally. So the NATO is there as an alliance of countries that look on themselves and the world in the same way. They have similar democratic setups, similar transparent financial arrangements for their military and so on. And we're there to protect each other. That's where historically NATO came from at the beginning of the Cold War, in the face of any threats, and to coordinate military policy. And UK's relations with the US, it's no secret, are extremely close. We also share a very special and unique history together and share a similar outlook on many issues around the world. So it's not surprising to find us cooperating in NATO. But NATO remains the international platform for our defence projection around the world.
Hello, welcome back to Hot Issues. We are in conversation with His Excellency, the High Commissioner of Britain, Jean Benjamin, and we're talking about relations between Ghana and the UK. We're talking about the Commonwealth. We're talking about many, many other things. Your Excellency.
Please call me John. No,
I
will. Your
Excellency. I will. Jean, what is the relevance of the Commonwealth in solving the everyday practical problems of member countries? Hunger, war, poverty. What is the relevance of the Commonwealth in dealing with this daily, everyday practical problems?
Well, I think the Commonwealth provides a forum in which, for example, development cooperation is a major theme and can look at how to grapple with some of those problems. What are the priorities of countries, particularly those who suffer from the phenomena which you've just mentioned, and it's a way of providing also peer group advice, and if necessary criticism and pressure when in certain countries the human rights or governance system is not working as it should. So it provides a forum based on common understanding and common history and shared values to air some of those issues. The same accusation can be thrown at any international organisation, up to and including the UN. What practical difference does it make for ordinary people on the ground? But it does, because it helps set government priorities. It helps through peer group discussion to focus governments in on the most pressing needs of their own populations. So I think it's a valuable forum in that sense.
In Ghana, one of the controversial issues has to do with the economic partnership agreement with the European Union. First of all, is it necessary to enter into this agreement from your point of view?
Well, you say it's controversial. but the Economic Partnership Agreement is supported by the government of Ghana. And it's not new. You talk about you just asked me if Ghana should enter into it, but it's an existing arrangement. It's not a new arrangement. And for those who criticise the agreement, I think I have to really recall that under the agreement, all, and I repeat, all of Ghana's exports have quota-free and tariff-free entry to the European Union. In the other direction, the idea over 20 years and longer is that eventually 75% of Europe's imports into Ghana should be tariff-free and quota-free, but that's only 75%, which, with the Ghanaian government able to decide which other 25% of imports from the EU remain under a tariff and quota regime. And it's very, very gradual over many, many years. So I actually think this is a very good deal for Ghana, because if this agreement didn't exist, many of Ghana's most important exports to Europe, and don't forget that historically in the last few years somewhere between 40 and 50% of all Ghana's exports have gone to the European Union, but if this agreement didn't exist, there would suddenly be quotas on Ghana's exports of cocoa, of fish, now of oil, etc., to the European Union, and which would make Ghana's exports much more expensive and do real damage, I think, to Ghana's economy. So I hope that generally in Ghana people accept that it's tremendously in Ghana's interest to have that tariff-free and quota-free access to the European market, which is not totally reciprocated, and that's something we accept, and we think is, because of Ghana's economic development status, is something that's right at this stage. But I personally, you won't be surprised to hear me say, I reject those who say that the Economic Partnership Agreement is a bad deal for Ghana. On the contrary, I think it's a good deal, and it's one that we support. It's one that the government of Ghana supports, and we hope that it will be initialed very soon. But again, it's not new. This is the continuation of arrangements that have been in place for a very long time now, ever since the Lomé agreements back in the 1990s.
That's the ACP, agreement. Correct. Yeah, but this one happens to be new. It's not the same agreement, is it?
No, of course. All these trade agreements have to evolve over time. They have to take into account new developments in the economy, in business, in commerce. Mm-hmm. But again, the most important thing is the EPA, the Economic Partnership Agreement, gives quota-free, tariff-free access for Ghanaian exports to the European market. And the European market, the EU market, is very important. Obviously, you only have to look at the trade figures to see that it's a very important part of the European of Ghana's export basket around the world. And we have a good trading relationship with Ghana, both bilaterally and through the European Union. We want that to continue, and we want Ghana's exporters to be able to export without having to face tariff and barriers which disadvantage them.
Right now, what is guiding trade between us and the European Union is referred to as an interim agreement. That presupposes that it is fairly new, doesn't it?
Well, the interim agreement is, if you like, a bilateral one, and don't forget that what we're now talking about, the Economic Partnership Agreement that we hope will be agreed very soon, perhaps even as early as next week in the next summit here in Accra, is that we're talking about an ECOWAS, a regional agreement with the European Union, with those same conditions that I've described. But fundamentally, the offer, if you like, to Ghanaian exporters is the same. It's a very favourable one. It's one that continues for and is guaranteed for a hugely foreseeable future of 20 years and more. So I think that again, it's important to stress that this isn't a completely new arrangement. It's the evolution of existing arrangements. Every trade agreement needs to be updated as conditions change, as markets change, as new products come into the export mix. But it's a continuation of what has gone before, an evolution of that. It's not a completely new idea.
What are the things that have changed, necessitating some new perspectives?
Well, the things that have changed include the nature of exports, the main products that are exported. They include aligning that to the European Union's own internal regulations. Mm-hmm. They include, to a certain extent, issues such as environmental issues and so on. But don't forget that the Economic Partnership Agreement also comes with a further package of development assistance from the European Union to enable Ghana and all of its ECOWAS colleagues and neighbours to harmonise their customs and other regimes in order to take the best possible advantage of this agreement. There are always evolutions. That's the same within the European Union as well as between any other two countries or two regions that have a trade agreement. It's a question of modernising it, but it's to do so firmly to the advantage of those who take part. Britain has always been an outward-facing trading nation. We believe in free trade. We believe wherever possible that greater trade, fewer tariffs, fewer quotas actually contribute directly to the prosperity of individual people. And I'll go back to an example I gave you before of the British company Blue Skies, for example, that employs 2,500 people. It provides a guaranteed income to hundreds of more farmers in their area. And that's totally dependent on an agreement like this, which means they can export without taxes into the European Union space.
You spoke about percentages. 75% of goods from the European Union coming in tariff-free and so on. And 100% from Ghana. Percentages of what? Because 75% could actually be triple or more of 100% of what Ghana is able to send. And if you consider the fact that already we have huge trade deficits, what is 75%, what is 100%? The reality.
Well, first of all, the trade deficits between Ghana and the EU are much less than the trade deficits between Ghana and other major countries in other parts of the world. That's the first thing to say. Secondly, we're talking about 75% free access for EU imports to Ghana in 20 years' time at the end of this process. At the moment, about 35% of EU imports are already liberalised, is the word that is used, tariff-free. The idea is the other 40% to take us up to 75% is something that will happen very gradually over the next 20 plus years, and the agreement has a review period built in every 5 years. So if the Ghanaian government and its ECOWAS colleagues are unhappy about how the tendencies that are arising out of that agreement, they can call for a review and for changes. So firstly, that 75% is not now. This is very gradual over a very long period. Even at the end of that period, as I've said, all of Ghana's exports to the EU will remain tariff-free. Now, one of the things that that we hope can happen is that much more value is added to the Ghanaian economy here in Ghana, that its gold, its cocoa, its oil can also be turned into other products here rather than just exported as raw materials. And that's something which we hope that tariff-free access to the European Union can also help promote. A lot of our development assistance, both bilaterally from the UK and what we do with our EU partners, is increasingly also aimed at trying to help promote a Ghanaian new small and medium enterprise sector in the private sector who can also export. So it's a holistic approach, and we hope that this agreement is not kind of some imposition onto the Ghanaian economy. It's completely the opposite. It's a means of spurring, through exports, a more active private sector which employs people, which creates wealth, which provides income. That's the aim, and we believe, as I said, in the UK, absolutely in the principles of free trade, and we think free trade brings greater prosperity to everybody, not just to one partner in a trading relationship.